Is a quick tutorial looking at how to approach paper 1 section B, and this video is focusing on the descriptive element. So before we start, I just want to remind you that section B is an assessment of your writing and that you should spend 45 minutes on this section. You are reminded of the need to write in full sentences, and that means you must make sure that you are using full stops and capital letters correctly. You are also reminded of the need to plan your answer, and it really should be that this front page should be covered in ideas that are going to help you. You're being asked to write something that's going to be used to award 25% of your overall GCSE marks in just 45 minutes. Therefore, good planning is essential. You are also reminded to leave enough time to check your work at the end. So you want to make sure that you've got approximately 5 minutes left at the end just to check for any obvious errors. So this is essentially how I would suggest you break down your 45 minutes. I would suggest that you spend up to 10 minutes planning, that you should spend 30 minutes writing, and then a 5-minute checking at the end. Now, you are being assessed for the quality of your writing and not your quantity. Therefore, there's no requirement to produce 3, 4, 5, 8 pages of writing in that time. In fact, as examiners, we would be much better to read 1.5 pages to 2 pages of well-crafted writing. And well-crafted means that you are paying attention to your spelling, your punctuation and your grammar, that you consider your sentence construction, that you play around with paragraphing structures, and that ultimately you produce something that is interesting for us to read. So let's have a look at this descriptive one. It says here, write a description of a mysterious place as suggested by this picture. Now, any place in the world could be mysterious, and the thing that I really want to draw your attention to here is the use of the word suggested. And all that means is that you use this picture as a springboard, a starting point for your creative writing. You don't have to just describe what can be seen in this image. Instead, you use this image to get you thinking about what you're going to be describing and what you're going to be writing about. Now, I would suggest for both descriptive and narrative writing, you apply a structure that's going to interest your reader. Think about what you learnt in paper 1 question 3, and the way in which a text is structured to interest the reader is of key importance. So I want you to consider that you would be using drop, shift, zoom in, zoom out and leave. Now, this structure allows you to have very distinct sections of your text that you're planning and you're writing. It also ensures that you switch focus to keep your reader interested, and it provides you with a planning tool that you're going to be able to apply quickly to make sure you've got plenty of things to write about. So if we're going to use this structure, we need to decide how we're going to apply this structure to this task, a description of a mysterious place as suggested by this image. So when you drop your reader, what it means is that you're dropping them straight into the scene, that you're establishing the scene. And so I'm going to go for a description of misty weather and loneliness. That's what I want to try and get across in my drop. I want to imagine that I've picked my reader up and I've dropped them right here between these two gates, and I'm really going to try and get them to understand what the weather's like, what the atmosphere's like. Shift is asking you to move your reader's focus away from that opening description to something else. Now, it could be a flashback, it could be something very precise about the location. As this is a description, I don't advise that you go for a flashback because you might make it too narrative. Instead, I would suggest that you shift the focus to something very specific but unseen. So here I'm going to shift my focus to a church in the background. Now, this church, this background element, it's nothing I can see in this image. It's going to allow me to use my creative skills as freely as possible. I then need to zoom in on something. Now, I would suggest that if you've gone for starting with the weather, you've then had this shift to a church, my suggestion would be to zoom in on something really immediate. So I'm going to zoom in on the footpath leading to the church. And I'm going to consider how it's overgrown, how it's looking. Then, when I'm being asked to zoom out, I'm going to return to that bigger picture. So when I zoom out, it's because I'm going to reach the church, perhaps about to enter. And it's at that point, this idea of entering, that I'm going to leave. Okay, and I'm going to try and give a bit of a cliffhanger. I want my readers to be really curious as to what is inside of this building. Another element to consider whilst planning is different types of sentence constructions or devices that you want to get across, that you want to use. And so here, in my description of the misty weather, in this sense of loneliness, I want to try to include some pathetic fallacy. So pathetic fallacy is where the weather mimics the mood. When I want to shift to the church in the background, I think I'd like to be able to start that section with an adverb. That's a word that ends in ly. That means that I'm going to be showing my examiner that I can start with words other than the word the, and most adverbs require a comma to be used after them, so I'm going to be accurately using a comma. Here, when I'm going to zoom in on that footpath to the church, I'm going to use a verb in the present participle. That means it's ending in ing. Again, that's going to show the examiner that I've got a control of language and that I'm really considering how to organise my work. When I zoom out, I think it might be really useful to start this section with adjective or adjectives, maybe a list of 3 to kind of bring that away. So just by doing that additional little bit of planning, I've started to highlight to myself some of the things that I want to include in my writing. What I want to share with you now is my attempt at the drop, except rather than write it for you and talk you through what I'm doing, firstly I just wanted to show you the drop that I've written and why I feel it would be successful in meeting the criteria of the exam. Silver threads of moonlight unsuccessfully attempted to pierce the cloaking mist that surrounded and suffocated them. Thick clouds rolled across the evening sky, signalling to any wise fool that it was time to go home. In the distance, a forlorn owl hooted once. They held tightly to one another's hands, their fingertips turning whiter than the moon as both the fear and the cold chilled their blood. With little effect, the old red torch's beam snapped on, briefly illuminating the way before it too was swallowed by the mist. They were all alone. So if you remember, in my plan, I said that I wanted to try to use pathetic fallacy to set the scene and also to create a sense of loneliness. So here, I've tried to start pathetic fallacy by talking about how there's a cloaking mist that surrounded and suffocated them. And so by the use of this, I'm trying to create a really sinister setting where the mist is thick and it's hard to see. I'm trying to suggest that there's an element of mystery, so I feel this would be a successful use of pathetic fallacy. I've then got thick clouds rolled across the evening sky, signalling to any wise fool that it was time to go home. So again, this reference to the clouds would once again be pathetic fallacy, and it's again being used effectively. I've then incorporated some sensory description, this time using hearing to introduce an owl and to try and create more than a one-dimensional feeling. I then change paragraph because although I'm still in the drop section, I'm switching focus from the weather to a character. I've tried to maintain my sense of mystery by not naming my characters and by using the they pronoun. It just adds to that sense of mystery. I've used here that they've held tightly to one another's hands, their fingertips turning whiter than the moon as both the fear and the cold chilled their blood. So here, this idea that fear chilling their blood is a metaphor to suggest that they're afraid, but also I'm still trying to create that mystery atmosphere, that mystery feeling, because I'm not revealing what's going on. You'll also notice that although I'm talking about characters, I'm not telling a story. I'm really trying to describe what's being presented. With little effect, the old red torch's beam snapped on, briefly illuminating the way before it too was swallowed by the mist. So again, we've got that reference to the weather, so that's a continuation of pathetic fallacy. And I said I wanted to create a feeling of loneliness, and so I've used this single isolated sentence, which is a declarative, they were all alone. By using the word alone, I'm obviously signalling the fact that they're lonely, that they're all alone. By having just this one sentence on its own, I'm using structure to represent that they're all alone. So, as an examiner, if this was produced for me by a student, I'd be really pleased with how this story started. They've thought about description, they've got some ideas about how they're going to create that sense of mystery, and the planning that they've done is obviously being used to help them with their writing. The next task would be to continue through this, continuing to write the remaining sections, but that will probably feature in another video. I hope that's been of use, guys. Thank you.